Suffering's not proof that you're far from God. It's precisely the point at which you're closest. There's an incredibly relevant but counterintuitive truth that's at play in our reality. Shared suffering is the ultimate forge for relationships. We don't usually think this way because, for the most part, our greatest goal in life is to avoid suffering at all costs. And yet, suffering is often our greatest teacher, master humbler, and the strongest forge for relationships. Teams that win championships together, they are not bounded by their victory, but by the shared suffering that was required on the road to that victory. Friends who run a marathon together aren't bonded by crossing the finish line, getting a medal, or all the free snacks at the end. They're bonded by the wall they hit back at mile 16, and by all the challenges they endured during their training. Couples aren't bonded by their promotions or their raises or individual success in their respective jobs. They're bonded by the late nights in bed, crying, wondering if this career move was a mistake, or if they'll ever find a good fit after getting fired, or if this pregnancy is going to end like all the others, or if their kids are going to make it through the night. Your bond with another person is less about your advice on how to get out of their mess and more about your ability to enter the mess and sit in the muck of life with them. To literally bear it with them. It's in shared suffering that we connect most deeply with each other. And I think you already knew that, but here's what I'm learning about myself. I don't think about God like that. I don't think that I'm closer to God or the universe or however you want to think about the divine. I don't think I'm closer to God in my suffering. I usually take suffering as a sign that I must be further from God, right? I usually think about my relationship to the divine like my relationship to people I admire. Now, you know this already. If you want to be like someone you admire, you got to reverse engineer their success and then put those steps into practice. That's why there's a million different videos on YouTube talking about the habits of successful people. Their morning routines are on there, their meal prep and their menus for the week. Underneath all of those videos, though, is this promise that if I just meditate or meal prep or have the morning routine that they do, I can achieve their success. I can have, in some ways, have what they have or be a little closer to them. And I think sometimes it's easy to think about religion and faith that way, especially the Christian faith. It can slip into this reverse engineered list of how to be more godly and therefore closer to God. And your ability to carry out the list determines your proximity to the divine. And then as pastors, we give people those lists and then tell them these are the things that you're supposed to do to get closer to God. And they're not bad things, they're good things, they're good routines, but they create the illusion that getting it right in life, in money, in relationships, in mental and physical health, in your career, doing it right is proof of your relational connection to God. And maybe it is. But then there's that seemingly universal truth that it's shared suffering that is the ultimate forge of a relationship. There's this letter in the New Testament by an unknown author to a group of people who were suffering. It's called Hebrews. And the author definitely had this suffering is a forge mentality when it came to faith. They wrote to their friends about this and its fit connection to Jesus, saying, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin." Now, that word high priest is the description of a role in the ancient Israelite religious structure. The job of the high priest was to be the divine's representation to humanity and humanity's representative to the divine. And it's how the author describes Jesus. And he says that Jesus can empathize with our weakness. Now let's talk about that word empathize, because it's not actually the most helpful translation for us. We use the word empathy to describe the ability to understand how somebody's feeling despite not experiencing their misfortune, which isn't really what the author's getting at here. You can also translate the word here as sympathy, but that's less about understanding and more just about having sad feelings for somebody who's going through something. The Greek word actually represents a bit of both and more. It literally means to suffer with, to shoulder the pain with, to get down in the dirt and sit in the muck of life with. Now, why is that important? Well, because the recipients of this letter, like I said, were suffering. And when they decided to start following Jesus, it meant that they got exiled from their former communities, from their families, and for some of them, their jobs and careers. I mean, their entire system of rituals and rhythms in life was gone. And all of that would have been hard enough as it was, but then when life came along in the form of sickness or poverty or loss or screw-ups or mistakes or regrets, when life smacked them in the face, they didn't have their former communities or rituals to fall back on. And I guess it could feel like it always does when we suffer. It could feel lonely, like God doesn't care, like we are so far from the divine. What the author of the letter wants their friends to know is that it's precisely in your weakness, in your struggles, and in your suffering. It's uniquely in those moments that you actually spend your life avoiding. It's in those moments of pain and struggle that you're closer to God than you've ever been. It's not your victories that forge your relationship with the divine. It's your suffering. Now, why does the author believe this so strongly? Well, it's because one, they believe that Jesus was the divine, and two, because Jesus suffered in every way that we do. I know the word there in the passage was tempted, but the original Greek word is a lot more versatile than just temptation. It literally means tested or trialed. And sometimes we suffer because of our own temptations, but sometimes we suffer because life is testing our mettle. Sometimes life can be a trial, and the author's point is that Jesus gets it. He's been there. You lost a loved one, so has Jesus. Friends stabbed you in the back, you can add that to his list too. Leadership doing everything they can to keep you from doing your job, Jesus has been there. Filled with anxiety and stress to the max, Jesus sweat blood and begged God to make it stop. Shamed sexually, he was stripped naked and hung on a cross on display outside a major city. Conflict with your parents or siblings, feel like they just don't get you? Jesus' family wanted to lock him up because they thought he was a lunatic. I mean, I challenge you to come up with some category of suffering that Jesus hasn't also experienced. And the author's point here is to say that your suffering isn't proof that God doesn't love you or that he doesn't care, or that he doesn't exist. Your suffering, your struggle is precisely the point at which God is leaning in, sitting with you, weeping with you. Jesus knows what it's like to be you, to be human. You know, people reach out to me every day with their struggles and sufferings, and not one of them wants my reverse engineered advice on how to better their life. They just want to be seen. They want to be heard. They just want to have their humanity acknowledged in the midst of their suffering. They just want to know they're not alone. You are not alone. Jesus has been through what you're going through. He's been there, and he's in there with you. The author of this letter says this isn't the moment to give up. It's not the part where you part with faith. This is the part where you approach the throne of grace, because the one who sits on that throne gets it. I mean, feelings are good and wonderful, and praise God for them, but feelings are not facts. The fact of the matter is you have never been closer to God than you are in your suffering, than you are when you struggle, or in your weakness, or your stress, or your anxiety, or your shame, or your doubt, or your failure, or your regret, because Jesus has shared your pain. He has shared your suffering, and that shared suffering is the ultimate relational forge. And there's a sense in which I've lost sight of this. I mean, I know it's true. I know it's true in sports and in friendship and in marriage. So why wouldn't it be true in spirituality too? And yet I avoid it at all costs. I deny suffering is happening, or I try to medicate the pain away, and I opt instead to try and reverse engineer some path to a pain-free life. All the while, Jesus is saying exactly what I need to hear. Suffering's not proof that you're far from God. It's precisely the point at which you're closest. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.